if they had engaged in exactly the same behavior, but if they had been, again, dark-skinned Aboriginal gay Muslims protesting about climate change, I don't think they would have been charged.
Earlier this week, the sentencing of Tamara Lich and Chris Barber was finally, and I mean finally, handed down after a marathon of a trial on mischief charges. So joining us to discuss what the sentence actually was, where does this leave Tamara and Chris, and more importantly, where does this leave Canadians when it comes to our freedom of speech and right to protest, President of the JCCF, John Carpe. John, welcome back.
Glad to be with you, Ryan, and with all your viewers and listeners.
Okay, so what we ended up seeing on Tuesday was Chris Barber and Tamara Lich received what was tantamount to basically house arrest for the first 12 months. And Chris Barber ended up with another 6-month conditional sentence, which is basically a curfew from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m., and then another 3 months after that, whereas Tamara, she ended up with a 18-month sentence, but because of her time served, that dropped down to 15 and a half. So she ends up with first 12 months being house arrest conditional, as well, the same as Chris, and then roughly 3.5 months of curfew after that. What's your initial thoughts on that?
I was really happy that they were not locked up in jail. I thought that would have been horrific and terrible. Tamara Lich already spent 49 days in jail, and there's a whole story there on just these trumped up, very aggressive, supposedly being in breach of bail conditions. But, this is on a mischief charge. It's not being in breach of bail conditions on a murder charge or aggravated assault or something. But anyway, she's already spent a lot of time in jail, which has been really hard on her and her family. And same for Chris Barber, who is, he's a good Canadian, played a key role in a protest that did inconvenience some people in Ottawa, but was amazing for its nonviolence. When you think about the thousands and thousands and thousands of people that were in Ottawa over a period of weeks, and there's no cars set on fire, there's no shop windows being smashed in, police are not being assaulted. It was just amazing. So it was great that I was really happy for both of them. The Justice Center has been, we're funding legal representation for Chris Barber. We did initially for Tamara Lich as well, although now she's getting the funding through the Democracy Fund. So it's been 3.5 years from getting arrested in February 2022 all the way through to here we are, October 2025. Now, the bad part, of course, is that, the house arrest, it's a cakewalk compared to being locked up in jail, but it's very unpleasant, right? You can't get out of the house to go grab a coffee with a friend. You can't spontaneously just up and leave and do what you want to do. You're only allowed to leave the house to attend a religious service or for work. And I think there's 5 hours per week for shopping. I'm not sure if it has to be one big 5-hour trip or if it's if you're allowed to parcel out the 5 hours, spread it out into several trips. So it is it's pretty tough in many ways. And I think the biggest problem that I see in Canada, it's not so much these sentences per se, but it's the double standard where if you are protesting for the correct cause, so if you believe that mankind controls the Earth's climate, if you believe, if it's about LGBTQ, Aboriginal, if it's for the environment, right, there's a different standard. Whereas if, in contrast to protesting against lockdowns, vaccine mandates, or let's say abortion, you're going to be treated very differently. And that's what's wrong. When you see Muslims praying in the streets of Toronto and shutting down the streets. And I'm a huge proponent of the right to pray in public. If you're on a public sidewalk and you want to pray, more power to you. That's part of being in a free society, but not shutting down streets with your prayer. That gets condoned by police. When Aboriginals in Winnipeg tore down a statue of Queen Victoria because they were protesting against residential schools, and the police watched in broad daylight as they tore down and vandalized a statue, which is blatantly criminal conduct. Why do they get away with that? Because they're deemed by the legal establishment to be protesting for the right cause, the correct cause. Therefore, they can do whatever they want. So that's a big problem that I see with the sentence. You could argue back and forth on whether too light or too heavy, and you could have probably some merit, or you could come up with strong arguments on either side of that. But it's the double standard that I find troubling.
Yeah, I agree. And my initial reaction as I was listening, because I was in the courtroom, live tweeting what what Justice Perkins McVeigh was saying in her decision, I was optimistic about halfway through, because it really sounded like that she was grounding her decision in cases that there was no jail time. So by the end of the first half, I was quite confident that they weren't going to serve any jail time. I was hopeful going into it that Tamara would have gotten time served, and Chris Barber maybe some house arrest, maybe like 3 months or something like that. But it ended up being more. And I think this decision ended up being, let's just say, the quote unquote best decision of a bad eventuality that we knew was going to happen, because in talking to people that were in the supportive camp of Chris and Tamara, there was a section of people who said that this was far too much, and then there was a section of people who said that that's better than it was. Given that there was that type of separation, I think this was probably hitting that sweet spot. Acknowledging, of course, that it's ridiculous we got to this point, but the fact that we are here, I think this was the best of a bad scenario. And in talking to Tamara right after, she said, I'm just glad I'm not leaving here without Chris. I'm glad that that we're both going home, and that neither of us are serving jail time. So in talking to both of them, I think they're both, all things being equal, they're pleased with the result.
If Chris and Tamara were dark-skinned Aboriginal gay Muslims who had come to Ottawa to protest about climate change, or believing that mankind controls the climate and the government's not doing enough, they could have engaged in the same behavior with the partial. There were people in Ottawa. I don't think anybody would disagree. And I wasn't in Ottawa myself, but I've heard a lot of different information from different people. I think most people would agree that there was some inconvenience to some Ottawa residents, which is what was the foundation for the conviction of mischief, because one of the definitions of mischief is to interfere with the lawful use and enjoyment of property, right? So if you're trying to walk towards your car or walk towards your house, and if I physically block you from going to your car or your house, I could be charged criminally with that form of mischief to interfere with the use and enjoyment of property. So that there was some of that in Ottawa, but if they had engaged in exactly the same behavior, but if they had been again dark-skinned Aboriginal gay Muslims protesting about climate change, I don't think they would have been charged. And I can't prove that. It's hypothetical. I have seen firsthand, defending free speech on campus, I've had clients who were speaking out some very unpopular speech, namely it was a pro-life speech. And you saw the criminal behavior of opponents not standing, 10 feet or 20 feet away and, engaging in debate or discussion or having a counter protest, but actually physically preventing people from going about their business, from setting up a display, from showing their signs, physical obstruction. I have never seen anybody arrested, even though that is criminal conduct. They could be arrested. It's like, oh, no. You can get, you can get within 6 inches of somebody and get in their face and stop them from expressing their opinions. You can physically interfere with their legal activities and with the use of their property, which is their signage and their displays. You can do all that and get away with it. So the double standard is disgusting. And if we don't clean up our act in Canada, it should be irrelevant what you're protesting for or against. The only thing that should matter is your behavior. So if we're going to throw the book at Chris and Tamara, because, let's say for argument's sake that the conviction is justified and there was some obstruction, right, of preventing people from going about their business. If that's true, then that should be applied across the board. So you don't let Aboriginals destroy statues because they're protesting against residential schools. You don't let Muslims obstruct streets with prayer. So it's really corrosive to not honor the rule of law.
Now, what precedent does this set for Canadians now across the country? Because the legal system has now said you can be arrested and charged for mischief. I think looking at the Freedom Convoy, that there was a mass of people, there's a mass of trucks that you're not going to see that in everyday protests. But is there a reason for Canadians to be concerned? Because the legal process went from start to finish, from arresting to prosecuting to jailing to conviction for people that were trying to engage in a peaceful protest.
I think apart from this problem with the double standard in, who gets prosecuted and who does not get prosecuted, which is a big deal. But apart from that, I don't think this sets any precedent because, 99.99% of protests in Canada do not involve hundreds of trucks driving to Ottawa and parking there and sticking around for weeks on end. That's a once in a lifetime or once in a century type of a protest. So, yeah, I think there need not be. I mean, some Canadians might interpret this as, oh, gee, if I take part in a peaceful protest, I risk getting criminal charges. That would be the wrong conclusion to take from this, because every other protest, if you do not, refrain from property damage, refrain from death threats, refrain from obstructing other people, do not prevent other people from going about their business, whatever their business might be. Let other people come and go and enter and exit. If you let other people who are not part of your protest go about their own business and lead their own lives, and if you refrain from property damage, and if you keep the noise so you're not violating the noise bylaws, then this whole Lich and Barber ruling, it's got zero impact on you. There's no need to worry about it.
Yeah, and I think an example of that was the Million March for Kids, in that there was a cross-country protest that ended up engaging tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Canadians from coast to coast. And in some cases, lots of people showed up. Now, it wasn't for weeks on end, but that's an example where there was peaceful protests involving a lot of people, and there were virtually no arrests and to my knowledge, no criminal prosecutions. Is that fair?
I haven't heard of any criminal prosecutions arising from that. That you're talking about the one just this past September?
It was
or more like last year or a year or two ago.
Yeah. It was like a year or two ago.
Yeah, no, I'm not aware of any. No, and there have been so many. Well, during lockdowns, of course, people got tickets, but that was for violating health orders that said that you could have, like in Ontario, you could have 0 people outside protesting peacefully with one of the government's orders in 2021. But the Ontario Court of Appeal struck that down in one of Randy Hillier's cases, so that was really positive.
So basically, Canadians should not be worried about protesting, should not be worried about the the right to assemble. And I would agree with that, because even Perkins McVeigh had said, as she was issuing the sentence, this is a very unique case, and she said there's virtually nothing else to compare it to, and the only ones that she could compare it to were literally within the same time frame, which is the Pat King ruling in that case, and the Coutts border cases, because it was involved in the same events. So, but apart from that, there was virtually nothing else that she had as comparables to this to draw down from in terms of case law. So, so Canadians should not be afraid to protest. Still get out there, and if you even if nobody else agrees with you, you still have a right to protest. Just do it peacefully, and do it in a way that you respectfully get your point across.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the purpose of the charter is to defend minority religions, minority opinions, minority protests, minority causes. The majority has no need of constitutional protection. Okay, if you practice the majority religion, people are going to tolerate that. If your opinions always align with majority opinion, it'll be tolerated. If you're protesting for something that everybody already agrees with, you'll be fine. But the reason we have charter rights and freedoms in the first place is for unpopular religions, say like, maybe Jehovah's Witnesses, or I don't know, whoever's unpopular today. They were pretty unpopular in Quebec in the 1950s, faced a lot of persecution. But if you're practicing an unpopular religion, or if you're expressing a minority opinion, an unpopular opinion that the majority considers to be wrong or false, even harmful, destructive, toxic, pure evil, but it's this is why the charter is there, is for the minority opinion. And it's also for protest. If you are peacefully protesting, you can do so for a cause that maybe 99% of your neighbors disagree with, and that's okay. So that's use them or lose them. If we keep on exercising our charter freedoms, especially our freedom of expression, then it'll keep it healthy and strong.